right. Thank you all for coming. Looks like we have a nice little crowd here, so thank you very much. You probably, when you came in, you saw this really beautiful show by Chris and maybe also this rock installation, which I want to start into directly, actually. It's deals a lot with change and ruggedness of rock, and then these very fragile flowers coming through, maybe a duality coming through there. So we'll talk about that. But I first want to introduce these two lovely people here next to me. We have Nancy Cohen Israel. She's an art historian, an arts writer, and a museum educator at the Meadows Museum of Art, where she oversees the docent program. While she began her career locally as a McDermott intern in education at the Dallas Museum of Art, over the intervening 30 years, she has been a presence in the local art world, serving as at multitudes of roles, and including gallery director, lecturer, curator, and juror, as well as the owner of Art a la carte. In the latter capacity, she organized and led art tours for 15 years through her popular program, Second Saturdays. Nancy continues to lead tours abroad for art lovers, including an upcoming trip to Belgium in June. Mhm. Nancy is a regular contributor to Patron Magazine and the annual Dallas Arts District Guide, covering the visual and performing arts in North Texas. She has been a contributing writer to exhibition catalogs for artists across the state, including James Searles, George Tobolowsky, Ellen Francis Tuckman, Chong Chu, Deborah Ballard, Meckay Otto, and Simon Warrench. She is currently working with a local painter, Connie Connolly, who's present here today, on a catalog for 2026 for her 2027 exhibition at the Grace Museum at Abilene. And then Chris Stewart, who is sitting to my right, he is a visual artist based in Dallas. He earned a BFA in painting from SMU and later completed a graduate degrees in art and business administration at SMU as well. Stewart has been presented or has presented solo exhibitions in the United States and internationally, including Fractured Memories at Sanger Gallery in Mexico City. And his work has also been included in duo and group exhibitions at venues such as Conduit Gallery, Pastel Co. in Mexico City, Hawker Gallery, as well as the Dallas Art Fair. In addition to his studio practice, Stewart has worked as a designer at the Young Museum and Legion of Honor in San Francisco. Previously, he has served as the creative director at Black Eye in Dallas. His background in visual design continues to inform his painting practice, particularly through an emphasis on editing, revision, and process. So, I want to get right into it. Thank you both for being here. It's really a pleasure to have you both. I want to start with an article that Nancy wrote for Patron Magazine that was really somewhat of a initiator for this talk here today. Where Nancy, you focus in the article for Patron a lot on dualities, and I wanted to have you maybe expand on that a little bit further and talk about that, what you got here to.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here today. It's such a pleasure to be here with Chris, who I've known for many, many years. So this is just a fun conversation for us to be having. I'm very grateful you all are here for it. So we did talk a lot in the article, and of course, as you can see, I hope in the work about duality, about beauty, decay, nature, return. One of the things I also want to ask you that I came up with this after the end of this conversation about what they're talking about is the world we're in right now. So currently we are living in, we always call it AI, but it is artificial intelligence, which those two words keep me up at night when they're together. But we're living in a completely digital world where everything is, download the app, click this link, etc. And yet your work is still very rooted in the tangible world. Your influences are from nature. You work in paint, this old, wonderful medium on canvas with wooden structures, wooden supports. We've got other work on wooden supports And so, sort of, how do you, as somebody who sort of became a professional illustrator in the dot-com boom, how has it felt sort of return to a more analog?
That's a great first question, Nancy, and thanks for putting me
Sorry.
off balance. No, but let me also, before I start trying to answer that question, say thank you both for arranging this. I guess I could say that as an artist, one could only dream of having someone show their work and then someone as accredited as yourself consider it and discuss it in conversation, dialogue like this. So thank you both for this. And to your question about this idea of returning to analog, I think maybe it just shows my age. In that, yes, of course, like when I started my design business, I was sort of in the right place, right time, with this idea of the internet coming up and no one really knowing what it was going to be when it grew up. And we're still maybe grappling with some of those ideas right now. But I think for me, like something that I'm able to really use my mind and my hands to sort of like work with in a tangible way is more rewarding to me than say like working behind a computer, pushing pixels around and trying to make them, I don't know, whatever the client wanted them to do, animate or whatever. So I think when I did kind of get back into painting seriously about 7 years ago, I really wanted to unplug in a way, but also be aware of technology, aware of the way people consume media and the way people consume even artwork to a degree. It's funny, like Instagram came about, and social media for that matter, after I had put down my paintbrushes a long time ago, and I realized then that like everyone's like looking at art through a tiny little screen, like they're no longer looking at art in real life, and I don't know if that's completely influenced me, but you can tell by some of the pieces of the format is square, and I do think that the original format for Instagram was these square sort of like ratios. And I was kind of poking at the idea of like, well, if you want to consume art in a square format, well then I will give you art in a square format. Now the stories and reels are very vertical, so they're this format. I'm not saying that was necessarily something I considered when I was working on these other ones, but maybe it was.
Well, let's talk about the duality that we originally planned to talk about first, this notion of nature and decay. And when you all came in, you saw the beautiful rock formation with the flowers in it, you may have said, somebody should change some of these flowers. They look like they've seen better days. Can you talk about intentionality?
Sure. I think one thing about the rock and flower intervention is that I have done interventions in gallery spaces before where I bring in elements from nature and allow them to play a role in the way we view the works. Sometimes it contextualizes the work, and sometimes it just provides another sort of layer to look at the work through. And a lot of times it'll inform the work, so it kind of gives the viewer a hint maybe at what we're going to be looking at. The other thing in this particular case is it's it's impossible to ignore. You know, when you first walk in, I mean, it's right there, and now you have to think, if I'm going to go down there, I'm going to have to navigate it. I'm going to have to kind of walk around it. The eye is led all the way down this linear perspective where it leads you down this corridor to this back wall where this piece is. And I feel like there's a lot of interplay between that piece, this piece here, and the piece on the ground. They're both very rectangular, and they almost work as like a reflection. And so there's a lot of interesting things that can happen when there's a intervention like that. Beyond that, of course, it's like it does beg the question, the why. The why? Why would someone take this element from nature, these rocks, for instance, and place them in a white-walled gallery space? And what is the meaning of that? And for me, I don't know that I necessarily answer it other than to say Um, well, a couple things on it. Number one, they're very organized rocks. They're arranged in such a way that's very straight. There's a cut through the middle, and then the flowers themselves come out of the rock, kind of come in between the rocks in this grid-like fashion. And I think it's interesting as I think about humans and what we do with our time. It's like we're humans are always needing to like organize and contain and control things, even nature. So maybe it's talking a little bit about that. Um, but also, of course, the flower itself, which is kind of what you were getting at, it's it's already been cut down by a human and meant to die, and meant to enjoy its beauty for a temporary amount of time. But I wanted them to sit there and through the course of the exhibition to sort of decay and die. The work oftentimes is about transition and change over time. You mentioned deterioration. Um, so I think it plays into that.
Can you talk a little bit more about this idea of beauty in the visual world?
Sure. So, you know, as I look at nature, and a lot of times nature is the thing that I look at when I want to really kind of meditate or contemplate things. And everything I kind of work on is derived from memories of experiences, lived experience. And oftentimes I find that some of the most beautiful things in nature and otherwise are things that have deteriorated. And I think about it like, okay, here's this beautiful like granite rock as an example, and it's obviously been eroding and changing for millions of years, yet it's so unbelievable. And so a normal person would be like, that's cool, let me take a picture. And then for some reason I'm sitting there thinking like, well, was it more beautiful like a million years ago, or will it be more beautiful 10 years from now, or when that root comes through and that other piece of the rock fractures off? And so I feel like it's not that's not necessarily important, but what I am looking at is like, is there this idea of negative decay, deterioration, evolution, that negative thing, is there a beautiful moment in that? And can I remember that years from now when I want to maybe paint?
Yep, go ahead. Yeah, I think there's a really interesting tension there where often uh, decay is viewed as something negative, but it's really it has a lot of beauty in itself. And I think you captured it really nicely in this exhibition where there's these dualities present. There's this really this rock field that is very nicely organized, and then these paintings that have different kind of color fields that collide with one another. I think my question there was like, do you in your working process, do you experience that as a balance that you're creating between these two, um, yeah, subjects, or is that more like a push and pull? Like, oh, this is happening first, and then I have to bring it back, and is it happening kind of side by side, or is that more like a process that is created by having to counter certain movements in there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think ultimately it's about starting a piece of work in a specific way with a specific memory in mind that I want to think about, and really trying to bring the emotion of that moment out into the piece. But of course, at a certain point, I look at the work and I respond to what I'm putting down. And so oftentimes it no longer becomes about that initial idea, and now it's more of the push and pull between how do I make this a successful piece of art, whatever that means. And so there's a balance there of things like color and composition and layers and things coming out of the layers and color, popping through or scraping away. And so it's a little bit of both, I guess, in that process.
One of the things I'm fascinated to are the differences between canvases, which are this wonderful, lush, color-filled, beautiful, that vibrate in their own way, and then the smaller ones on camera, which are far more brutal. So can you talk about, again, naturality of the organic versus the more architectural?
Yeah, sure. I guess when I think about the panel pieces as an example, I want those to be really structural. You mentioned architectural. I want, I am interested in the idea of the grid because it goes back to organization and sort of like uh, control. It's also very pervasive in art history. Of course, as artists have used grid for forever. I think about all these things, but I found that the wood allows like these real imperfections to really shine through in a way, which I like because obviously imperfections in nature occur and in our own selves, and there can be really beautiful moments in that. The cuts in particular are meant to symbolize the idea of memory loss. And so one thing I may have neglected of saying is that all the work is from memories of experiences. Maybe I did say that, but I think what comes out of that oftentimes is the struggle to actually recall how it was and what I was feeling at the moment. And what I've also found interesting is that the more times you replay it in your head, the more fractured it becomes. It's almost like that game of telephone, right? Where someone says something to you and then you repeat it to someone else, and by the time it gets in your line, it's completely different than what it originated as. But it may have some, some notion of being something similar. So I think as as I think about things and then try to remember them and then try to document them, and then the next day I'm thinking about changing it. Now I'm remembering what I just documented, and so it does kind of work that way. And so I wanted to showcase that through the cuts symbolizing the idea of like fragments and memory, or glitches, if you will. Oh, but on the canvases, you still have some of that. You still have some of that if something might not quite be right. So the same thematic is there. It's just perhaps that um, well, there might be incomplete areas to signify the glitches, or there might be areas like this white here that's kind of like, well, shouldn't that be painted all the way to the edge or something? But no, maybe that's the glitch.
Well, I know we've had this conversation several times already about this painting over here. When I first saw in the studio, I thought, oh, that should be horizontal. And then I saw it as vertical, and it's a whole different, it gives you different perception. So I think what you're saying about playing this with perception are actually very true. And I think possibly it was, we're reading too much into it, which art historians can do. It's a horizontal, you can see a landscape, but again, obviously it looks beautiful and vertical too. It gives us some different perceptions.
It really does, and I want to kind of open up maybe a conversation between the two of you about that because, as you just said, there's a really strong feeling of landscapes in the work. Like it's undeniable almost. But I want to kind of, yeah, talk or have you talk about the how that works. How our eye maybe tries to find horizontal lines to create landscapes, or how they they are abstract depictions of landscapes and how that works together. So if you want to expand on that, that'd be great.
I'll let Nancy expand on that. Actually. Well, you're the one that saw it that way. No, and it's been mentioned a few times. You mentioned a number of people who are like, hey, did we hang that wrong type of thing. And I think the answer is maybe. If you like it the other way, maybe it was hung wrong.
In both directions.
No, but honestly, like that's kind of what I was saying when I was saying that the there might be areas that feel a little off, and some paintings may be more overt like that one where, yeah, the horizontal line should be the other way. But in reality, when I was looking at that, and maybe that's the exaggeration that's happened over the course of years, but think I remember being on this edge of a cliff where the sky just kept going down below me. And so I wanted to really accentuate that with the sky, if you want to call it a sky, being on the left all the way down. So yeah, it was kind of the way I remembered it, but in a way, it's probably embellished. And so yeah, maybe the stuff off to the right, which was kind of greenery and trees and stuff, maybe there was also sky kind of above that I neglected to put in. So I think, again, though, I am sort of responding to what's being put down. After a while, it becomes like now I want to like kind of change the focus a little bit about what I'm thinking about.
Well, I think some of it also plays with our minds chromatically, right? Maybe if you didn't have all that blue on the left, it wouldn't scream sky to me. Maybe it would have been purple. So I think that we as humans are somewhat programmed
Right.
to see landscapes. Think of green as a landscape color, think blue as a sky color, etc. So and I think even with this one, which is gorgeous. One of the things I love with this one is the quality of the brush strokes and the way it just moves your eye both across and up and down. But it's similar, you've got blue, is it this ocean, is it rocks, which when mountains, whatever it is, but I think that dramatically we are
Trained.
Yeah, I think evolutionarily too, humans walking on a plane, seeing a horizontal line as, as a guidance almost, it's very much in our genetic code, I think, there, and it's just, it's real interesting though how we see abstract paintings and they become landscapes for us, and maybe they are even better vessels of creating memory, because it's what you were saying earlier too about the cuts in the smaller pieces symbolizing memory loss, and there is maybe abstraction maybe a better vessel as than realism for preserving memories of certain places or certain feelings. It's a really interesting thought, I think, to see something abstract as a better representation than something figurative, or something representational. So
yeah, I mean, and then if you think to like abstract expressionism or something, it's sort of like what I wanted was like to have hints and like clues, and maybe these are natural looking colors. To your point, there's blue, and so that's got to be sky or water, and greenery can be, obviously we know what that means. So I wanted to hint at something from nature, but again, because it's like a memory, and again, it's something that I guess as the climate and environment changes and evolves around us, I also want to pay homage to the idea that we also evolve, our age, our minds, our bodies, and so that needs to come out as well. And I am not interested personally in depicting a landscape like realistic.
Well, I think the point is well taken as far as memory loss of those green paintings that we've all experienced glitches, and that's really what those cuts kind of remind you of. Not being able to remember something or whatever, but then it comes back. Okay, it's just a little glitch.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess it speaks to the fragileness of life. And so the rock piece in there with the plant matter, the flowers coming through and then dying, it speaks to that life, the same thing, that life cycle.
And you had other work in the gallery in which you brought rocks.
Yeah, right here.
Exactly. So do you want to talk about how you conceive of these works with these actual elements of nature?
Yeah, sure. Well, the work you're describing was on this wall, and there was a sort of barrier in a way of balanced rocks in front of it. And the reason why I did that was, initially I wanted to contextualize the work, and give a hint at what I was thinking about. But as I messed with it in the studio, I realized that this wall actually kind of became a perilous material, something that looked like it could just fall at any moment. And as I looked at the composition of the work, it had this balance to it that also felt precarious. And I guess I was thinking about it that way of, what if the two went together? What would the result be? And would that provide the clue of what I was thinking about? As people saw it in the studio, I noticed that in a good way, people were kind of questioning, can I go around it? What if I knock it over? Is it is it somehow like adhered together? And so I noticed there was like a performance to it, which I also kind of liked. And so in the gallery space, it was equally interesting to see people's reactions. And I think, again, it's like this idea of like the question of why. And I do think that that's important to my work in that, like, when people are suddenly confronted with things that are out of place in a gallery, like rocks, it's sort of like, what's going on here? And it pushes maybe the viewer a little bit to think, um, where they might otherwise just look at the painting and kind of walk on to the next one. Um, Whether the work was a masterpiece or not, it's sort of like there's so many things in the gallery. So, um,
Yeah, and it creates a really interesting tension and a duality. Again, what we were saying earlier, our white wall gallery space here with polished concrete floors, is a very kind of um, doesn't have a lot of natural elements in it by itself, and bringing in these rocks and flowers and all these natural occurrences, it really creates a really interesting tension of artificial space versus natural space, and how people interact with that. It seems very foreign in this white wall space, where we don't have anything laying on the ground really, and then there's just a stacked up pile of rocks there. It's really a really interesting. Not just it's a really kind of wonderful comment on how humans behave, I think.
Well, that plus the idea that the rocks would never show up that way in nature. Obviously, there had to be a human or artificial intelligence assembling those together in that way. Similarly, the rock here could never really occur that way in nature. And so it goes back to the idea of, yes, some human has to control this and organize it, and why. So that was kind of forefront of my mind.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the duality of that is a really wonderful idea in the work, but also I think transitioning. We spoke about the flowers slowly dying over the course of the exhibition here, and they falling slowly, initially actually quite fast, and then that process slowed down a little bit, which is actually really fascinating to me. How these flowers interact and how something unforeseen like that can happen too, but also, I think some of the paintings have a sense of transition in them. I know we especially talked about these two large square pieces, how they start out and how what they become over time. And yeah, if you want to talk about how the process kind of happened there, and maybe I'll have some other pieces as well, because you have a really beautiful texture in there, and I think that's really wonderful. So
yeah, like the idea of transition over time is very, very, very important to the work. This piece behind me is called The Passing. So obviously the name hints at something that may be passing, or an element of time. I think for this piece, we talk about a lot about the negatives of this idea of decomposition or something decaying. Um, Someone described this as like heavenly, and so I feel like there's also like a real hopeful message in some of the works and an inspiring idea. Speaking of that duality, which is like, okay, there's something kind of not right, or there's something kind of like a feeling of solitude here, but then there's this inspirational message as well. And so in this case, it actually was this kind of storm, if you will, passing, but the sky is so beautiful right afterwards. And so, not rather than focus on that kind of negative moment of the storm, it's like, look at this amazing quality that happened afterwards. But interestingly, to me, anyways, like when I'm looking at things like that, usually they're very panoramic and horizontal. In this case, I wanted to kind of control that experience for the viewer and say, like, no, you can't see like the storm over here anymore. In fact, even to the point of kind of putting up these lines on the edges to keep you framed in so that you can only experience this sliver of time. Um, so, yeah, I mean, the gestures are there, the layers are there, but the idea of control and guiding the viewer is also there.
I think it would also be helpful to just talk about your own personal background when you met, how you said, in Colorado, and how that physically placed you outdoors and in these gigantic expanses of the sky and air.
It's like I grew up, and actually my parents are here. They'll remember my mom's father was a farmer in Southwest Colorado, and we would go up there in the summers quite a bit. And it's experiences like those. It's not only there, but certainly was a big impactful, memory bank. But yeah, it's like seeing like a mirage on the road when you're driving forever, or seeing like the way water runs through a canal and juxtaposed with like man-made you know farming equipment and stuff. Actually, the canals being man-made. So it's things like that that are often present in my mind when I'm trying to remember kind of things that are, I guess, and the reason why those memories are important is because those are times, not just the Colorado ones, but any moments from nature that I've spent kind of contemplating and meditating, if you will. Meditating, I use that word loosely. Not like I'm sitting there like a monk, but more just enjoying the outdoors and really thinking over a period of time. And that's where I start to then remember later in life those moments as things that I want to try to re-explore.
Yeah, and I wanted to. There's a really interesting story you told me about these two square paintings. Again, that's I think where that process of layering and transition from a starting point to the finished painting is really interesting, because these started out as mirrored pieces, right?
Right. So, like a lot of times, because I want the work to also evolve over a period of time, I'll oftentimes put like a base layer of paint, which I know is going to change. And in this case, these two paintings were about, or not about, but I used the subject matter of a large tree that had been cut down, the stump of which was about the size of these paintings. The stump was like 60 inches ish, and um, and so I painted that, but I painted it on the canvas, and then the other one I painted it a reflection of it. So it was like the left side now is the right side of this thing, just as like an idea of like a starting point on a painting, and then I layer and start to work the piece in something else. But there are remnants from each on each that still reference those initial layers. And so you can actually see some of the initial stuff. And the easiest place to see it is on the left side of this one, where there's that sort of the darker shape on the far left, and then the right side of the other one, where that same darker shape is kind of there. So if those butted up against each other, that would be the mirror. There's other elements in there that also are mirrored, but they're a little more like Where's Waldo to try to find them.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think it's important that the work also goes through a deep evolution.
Yes, and I think that's so interesting to see these kind of remnants, from an artist's creation. It's a really fun story for me. I think that because it's really shows you adding that texture and layering in there, and really something very foundational as a tree stump, and then working your way from there. And I feel like some of the compositions follow that loosely and really create a nice transitional moment there, and attack tension as well again. So I really feel like that's wonderful. So
Thank you.
really great pieces, and I feel like that's also happening across other pieces throughout the exhibition. There's layering and dualities to kind of the yeah processes kind of interchanged, and um, I think that's visible throughout all the pieces. So um, yeah, so
Should we have some questions?
I think so. Yes, and maybe one closing remark to kind of bring our section to the end is, we focus back on the rock installation where all those parts come together of transition and duality. These rocks, very heavy, being able to crush the the flowers within them, but also a beauty in that as well. That duality, and I know you are referencing Death Valley in this piece loosely as well. Where there's a super bloom happening every, I think you were saying, 8 to 10 years or something like that. So very rarely where these flowers pop up in the desert and really create that beauty, and that is only possible by them dying later on too, and leaving seeds in the ground to then being able to blossom again 10 years from now. So there's uh, it is a necessity, but also beauty within decay, and I think you're
Rebirth.
capturing that
Yeah.
beautifully here. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for the two? Or I'll take questions too, but I usually am not the most interesting person here.
It's kind of a question and a comment. You keep talking about transition and time, but what I feel and see in the paintings is a continuum of time. So when you're looking at it, you don't feel like you're getting a slice of it. You really feel like it is a painting in motion and time in motion. And I mean, every collector would, love to have that in the home where every time you look at it, it feels tumultuous sometimes, and you refer to togetherness sometimes, and so you might bring your own mood to the table, at times, but there's so lovely in that so many artists capture moments, and you manage to put time in the bottle, so it feels like there's a cloud inside a bottle just churning. It's so emotional. Really.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, yes, I think of them as like these slices in a moment of time. But to your point, when I live with them myself, I love how even like the interpretations of them can change. And when natural light comes into play, I mean, here we don't have it, but in the studio, certainly I have these windows that the shadows and light dances off the works, and it unveils like different colors and layers that I hadn't even seen before. And so I do also like the fact that you can enjoy them over a period of time. And I appreciate that comment because that's really nice to hear from such an accomplished painter. So,
You've shown us how you can handle all this. It's really striking.
thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Your comment on the vertical versus the horizontal has me imagining that turned on its side and this one now turned on its side to accomplish a little bit of the same, the blue on the left and the body. You obviously painted, I say obviously, but
Yeah.
you painted vertical.
I did. Yeah, I did paint vertically on that piece. Yeah. I mean, I really don't like flip the canvases while I'm working on them too much. I know a lot of artists do, and so I don't. And usually you can tell because a lot of times there'll be like solvent and stuff that'll kind of drip down the painting. A lot of times I will, paint some of that out, but sometimes leave some of that there so that I also, because there's some randomness to that, which I also like, and I like the idea of that maybe solvent or drip marks playing a role in the composition, and so I think that's a giveaway a lot of times that they're not necessarily flipped a lot while I'm painting. I'm not really at all. But
There's
yeah.
one over your right shoulder.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very, yeah.
So, well, I appreciate that. Can we have Connie speak a little bit more about how she likes the work?
Hi, I'm his wife, but I would love to hear more about what you didn't talk, not mention your actual construction on some of these pieces of framing, how important that is to you, and how much joy you've gotten out of working with wood.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a good point. Like the she's asking about the frames that I've made, as well as some of the woodworking and construction of the canvas structures, and you know, it's interesting. And I there's two parts to that because number one, there's this idea of our own age, which like we all go through age. I mean, nothing crazy about that. It's just that I feel like while I'm able-bodied, I need to do as much of the physical work as I can myself. And it really pushed me to work on a little bit of a larger scale so that I could do that, at the moment. So it was important to me to sort of like on these big ones to build my own stretcher bars to kind of like, work with wood that way, as well as stretching the canvases, etc. As far as the frames go, the edges of the work are always important to me. Like I mentioned, the edges here being contrived in a way so that kind of frame it in. The ones that have the walnut wood frames on them are frames that I made, and you know, like to me, I never thought I'd be like someone who was a woodworker. Like I'd never done it before, but I started thinking again about the physical nature of creating, and I wanted to try it. And I have found that I really enjoy the therapeutic qualities of sort of working with my hands and thinking about also like, you know, I guess it would be a mathematical or whatever, but like, what can this yield if I buy some wood? Like, how much frame can I get out of it, and how do I need to cut it down the right way to mill it to the right width and all that kind of stuff. So it's been really fun to work on. I will also say that the wood itself, I find from lumber yards that a lot of times the wood has been discarded, well, really kind of scrap, like it's used for a project and then they've kind of done with that. They've already cut through what they need and now that's kind of scrap. And I will look to that to buy to see if I can repurpose it and give it new life. So it does speak to this idea of that recycle that we talked about, the repurposing and the life cycle. So yeah, that's been something I really enjoyed.
I also have to say the craftsmanship in it is very nicely done. It's they're exquisite frames, and they really elevate the work a lot. It's from a gallerist's perspective. It's not always you want to have an artist do their own frames, because it's always it shifts the work in a certain direction. But I think you've done a beautiful job, and it really accentuates the qualities of the work very well. And I think it's really like exquisitely done. I think it's really nice. Yeah.
There's a funny story. Maybe I'll tell real quick. The first time I did a frame, there's a woman who bought some works from me, and she was asking like, well, how should I present these on the wall or whatever? And I was like, you know what? I said, you know what I was thinking would be super cool is if they were framed with like oak wood for some reason. And I've always thought about trying to do it. I thought that would be a fun experience to try to create frames. And so, she left. And then literally the next day I got a text from her, and she said, let me know when I can pick up the framed art pieces. And I was like, oh my God, did I agree to build frames for these? And I was sitting there in my mind like replaying it over and over again. And I was like, well, I better learn how to do it really quick. And I literally went and like experimented and did them.
That would be the memory glitch.
There was a memory glitch there. I tried to use it to my advantage, but to no avail.
But it's true that it is.
Thank you.
Good happenstance.
Well, thank you.
Okay, do we have any further questions? No? All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to our talk here.